Welcome to our meeting. Well, welcome. We'll get started exactly at 1:30. We are so fortunate today to have two impressive and knowledgeable speakers who will tell us about Project 2025. But first, a few logistics. To minimize distractions, we're disabling the chat during most of our first presentation. And a few minutes before the end of the presentation, we will open it up for questions. And we've already received several questions on this important topic. Now, on to the subject at hand, which is Project 2025. Project 2025 is a far-right presidential transition project developed by the Heritage Foundation and over 100 conservative groups. It is composed of 4 pillars. The first pillar is a far-right policy guide for the next Republican administration and consists of approximately 700 policies. The second pillar consists of a database of personnel who could serve in and would be loyal to the next administration. The third pillar is training for that pool of candidates dubbed the Presidential Administration Academy. And the fourth pillar is a playbook of actions to be taken within the first 180 days in office. In short, they are organized. Now you might ask, why are we talking about Project 2025 when Trump has said, quote, "I know nothing about Project 2025, unquote, while also saying, quote, "I disagree with some of the things they're saying," unquote. Well, CNN has found that 140 Trump officials had a hand in Project 2025. They're authors, editors, and contributors, including 6 former cabinet officials and 4 ambassadors. Of the 700 policies detailed in Project 2025, CBS News has identified 270 policies that match Trump's past policies and campaign promises. Even if Trump is telling the truth, which I certainly sincerely doubt, we know his staff and appointees will be coming from Project 2025 and will push these policy agendas. On Tuesday evening, Vice President Harris demonstrated how easy it is to manipulate Trump. Now, moving on to our speakers. Our first distinguished speaker is Mariko Hirose. I'm sorry for mispronouncing.
No worries.
Hirose. Thank you. Who is the Chief Program Officer at Americans United for Separation of Church and State, or AU. AU is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization and does not support or oppose any political parties or candidates. However, they do view Project 2025 as a future threat, regardless of political parties or candidates, since it is a roadmap that Christian nationalists will continue to push. At AU, Mari oversees and coordinates AU's program strategies, including legal, public policy, communications, outreach and engagements, and the Legal Academy. Mari is a lawyer with wide-ranging experience advocating for civil rights and civil liberties, from serving as the U.S. litigation director at the International Refugee Assistance Project to working for the New York Civil Liberties Union and the American Civil Liberties Union. But most importantly, she graduated from Stanford Law School and clerked for the Honorable Stephen Reinhart of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. Please welcome Mari.
Thank you so much, Karen. And thank you to everyone for inviting me to your meeting today to talk about this very important topic. So I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to start us off with a short video from 2 clients, a couple that we at Americans United represent.
can't imagine a better life for us than as parents. I wanted to be able to have at least one biological child. Then we realized that a biological child wasn't an option for us. Then we decided to do the foster to adopt.
We started lining everything up.
So we found a child, a little boy in Florida. This one stood out to us. Unfortunately, as a Christian organization, our executive team made the decision several years ago to only provide adoption services to prospective adoptive families that share our belief system.
Liz just called me crying. Because we were Jewish, we weren't able to be parents. It was a gut punch. Our taxpayer dollars are going to foster care, yet we can't adopt a child through that system.
I know it's hard sometimes seeing any of your friends that have kids. You're happy for that person, but you also long for that.
Project 2025 is this voluminous 900-page document that the Christian nationalist movement has come up with on how they're going to take over the United States, basically.
To know that Project 2025 recognizes what's happening and is supporting it, it's really hard to swallow.
It's really disheartening to see that there's entire political arms at this point hell-bent on trying to make us second-class citizens.
We know this is an injustice.
If Project 2025 can come for us, it can come for anyone. Americans United for Separation of Church and State. That kind of sounds like what we're trying to do right here.
They've been along with us for all the struggles and the ups and downs. They handle all the really complicated things that I don't always understand. We tell our story and they take care of it from there.
They're dedicated to the cause of not letting a theocracy be established.
Americans United has been a light for us in this difficult time.
We're still nervous, but at least we know we're not alone.
Oh, sorry. I did not mean to do that. Okay, sorry. I couldn't move to the next slide, but I wanted to start with sharing that video because it's such a powerful story. And it's the reality that we are already seeing. It is the type of discrimination that's being advanced by Christian nationalists in various parts of the country right now. And we see that platform reflected in Project 2025. So that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. Let me just get back to my slides. Okay, so the format of my talk today, I will give you a little bit of introduction about Americans United for Separation of Church and State and what we do. And then I'll talk about what is Christian nationalism. Then go into what is the Christian nationalist policy agenda, which is basically Project 2025. That's where I'll get into the contents of Project 2025. And why is church-state separation more critical than ever? Okay. So what is Americans United? We are a national organization dedicated solely to defending the separation of church and state. We are the shield protecting the foundational American principle of freedom of religion, including the right to believe or not to believe for all. So we believe that the separation of church and state protects both believers and non-believers and both the church and the state. We've been working in this area for over 75 years. And as Karen mentioned in the intro, we are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. We do not support or oppose any political candidates or parties. But what we see in Project 2025 is a threat that is existing right now, and that is going to continue to exist regardless of what 2025 might bring us. Okay, so what is Christian nationalism? Sorry. Oh, sorry. Okay. So Christian nationalism, I think it's really important to make clear, it is not Christianity. Many Christians reject Christian nationalism as against their beliefs and against democracy. Christian nationalism is an extremist movement that believes in the lie that America was founded as and must remain a Christian country, and that our laws and policies must ensure that white Christians hold on to power and privilege. And when I use the term Christian nationalism, I really use it interchangeably with the concept of white Christian nationalism, because this is about privileging a certain view of extremist religion, of Christianity, and of privileging white people within this country. This is an extremist movement that has existed for a long time, but we have seen a troubling resurgence in recent years as backlash to the success of the civil rights movement and to the celebration of diversity in our society. So diversity of races, of nationalities, of religions, of genders, and of sexual orientation. So when I try to feel better about everything, I say, well, we're winning on the whole, and that's why there is this backlash, but the backlash is very real. According to Pew Research from earlier this year, 13% is a percentage of Americans who support declaring Christianity as the official national religion. So the people who support Christian nationalism, it's a minority within the country, but they are certainly becoming more visible now. We've seen the Christian nationalist flag fly in the halls of Congress. We've seen a flag on the vacation home of a certain Supreme Court justice. Their agenda is being pushed everywhere around the country. It is a movement that is very powerful, that is well-funded, and they've co-opted a number of terms to their advantage. So moral majority, silent majority are terms that they've co-opted, even though we know that their views are actually not in the majority. And religious liberty is another term that's often used to use religion as a license to discriminate, instead of how we use it at Americans United for Separation of State, Church and State, which is that separation of church and state allows everybody to practice their religion, and it's not about a certain form of majority religion using their religion to discriminate, like we saw in the case of the Wooten Rams. I mentioned that this is a very well-funded movement. We call the network that supports the Christian nationalists a billion-dollar network, shadow network. And some of the organizations that are part of this network include Leonard Leo and the Federalist Society. They are credited for stacking the Supreme Court so that they can get the results that they want on issues such as abortion. And with the recognition that they would not be able to win on those issues if they had to go through the court of public opinion. So stacking the Supreme Court was a particular strategy to get these minority views imposed on the rest of the country. And then we have Alliance Defending Freedom. Alliance Defending Freedom was founded by a group of televangelists and radio preachers in 1993. It's a self-described Christian law firm with an annual revenue of over 100 million as of 2022. And it has been litigating cases, including in the Supreme Court, that deprive LGBTQ plus people of equal rights, and claims to have drafted the model bill that was at the heart of Dobbs v. Jackson, the case that ended the right to abortion access. Family Research Council, that's an anti-LGBTQ plus and anti-abortion organization with $24.3 million in revenue in 2022, and a mission to, quote, serve in the kingdom of God by championing faith, family, and freedom in public policy and the culture from a biblical worldview. So the mission to actually take down that wall of separation between church and state that protects all of us. The First Liberty Institute is a legal organization with almost $25 million in revenue as of fiscal year 22-23. It has fought cases that weaponize religious freedom to deprive LGBTQ plus people of equal rights and siphon taxpayer dollars to private religious schools that are allowed to discriminate and indoctrinate. And we have Concerned Women for America, an anti-abortion and anti-LGBTQ plus organization with a mission to, quote, protect and promote biblical values and constitutional principles through prayer, education, and advocacy. And a vision of leading, quote, a movement dedicated to impacting the culture for Christ through education and public policy. So again, you see that mixing of religion with public policy. And then finally, America First Legal Foundation. That's a legal foundation, a legal organization that was founded by and is led by Stephen Miller, known for his connections to the white nationalist movement. And they started as a nonprofit in 2021. And the next year, they raised $44.4 million in revenue. So that is the amount of money and power that we are contending with. And this is just some of the groups that are behind the Christian nationalist movement. But if you look at the introduction to Project 2025, you will see that all of these groups are listed as contributors to the project. Okay, so what is the Christian nationalist policy agenda? Well, it's quite clearly spelled out in Project 2025. The opening pages are shockingly problematic. And it's a 900-page book, so I haven't even looked at all the pages that carefully, but if you're going to look at any of the pages, the introduction, the opening pages will give you a pretty good overview of what's going on. So in the opening pages, in the opening pages of Project 2025, the authors lay out the project's core promise. So now I'm talking about the box on the left-hand side, the lower box. The authors lay out the project's, one of the project's core promises as one to, quote, secure our God-given individual right to enjoy the blessings of liberty. But the source of our rights in this country is not God, it is the Constitution. And this may seem like a very small thing, but the difference really plays out throughout the entire document because the project focuses not on securing people's rights, but on taking away the rights of those who do not align with the narrow view of the world envisioned by Christian nationalists. So I wanted to point that out. There's a lot in the foreword that I think might sound like a euphemism or might not sound like a big deal, but there really are so many signs of how this ties into Christian nationalism. Another part of the opening pages that really caught my eye, on page 4, woke progressivism is threatening the tax-exempt status of churches and charities. And what they mean here is that there are certain churches and charities that are religious in nature that do not want to comply with civil rights laws, even when they are receiving taxpayer funding. And that's another theme that you will see running throughout Project 2025. And that links to this box on the right, which is both shocking and rather nonsensical, but they say it right here. The terms sexual orientation and gender identity, diversity, equity, inclusion, gender equality, gender equity, gender awareness, gender sensitive, abortion, reproductive health, reproductive rights, and any other term used to deprive Americans of their First Amendment rights must be deleted out of every, typo there, every federal rule, agency regulation, contract, grant, regulation, and piece of legislation that exists. So that kind of makes no sense to say that you can't say those words in law or regulation, but here's the list of concepts that they don't like. And when they say that these terms are being used to deprive Americans of their First Amendment rights, they're referring back to this concept of they think that certain churches and certain religious institutions that do not respect these rights are being required to follow these rights, principles of civil rights and equity, and they don't like that. So that's the complaint that they're putting forward here, and that is reflected in a lot of the policy proposals that follow. Okay, getting into some of the specifics of Project 2025, education. So why do Christian nationalists care about public education? It's because young people are impressionable, and if they can preach and indoctrinate early in life, they can most efficiently build support for their movement. And in fact, it's one of the pillars of the 7 Mountain Mandate, which is a concept in very narrow, extreme Christian nationalist movement that believes in gaining power by conquering the 7 pillars of society that they seek to influence. And one of those 7 pillars is education. The others are religion, family, media, arts and entertainment, business, and government, which is also where Project 2025 comes in. What Project 2025 calls for is eliminating the Department of Education. That makes it much harder to enforce certain protections that protect LGBTQ+ students, students of color, and they call for promoting vouchers and other mechanisms that siphon taxpayer dollars to private religious schools. And then with an intent to fight against complying with certain laws that would apply to public schools. Another area that is talked about a lot in Project 2025 is LGBTQ+ rights. Christian nationalists through Project 2025 call for rejecting people's gender identities. They call for rolling back protections against LGBTQ+ discrimination. and Project 2025, I should say, is directed towards the federal government. So in this document, it's talking about not enforcing certain protections, stripping away protections where they can through the mechanisms of the federal government. The Project 2025 also talks about excluding LGBTQ plus families from the prioritized definition of family. And it actually talks about biblically based definitions of family as the ideal family structure. Reproductive freedom. Christian nationalists call for defining life according to religion and not medical science. Ending medication abortions, limiting access to emergency abortion medical care, ramping up abortion surveillance. Basically, under Project 2025, access to abortion will be extremely limited. And all because of this underlying principle that life begins at conception, which is the religious principle that Christian nationalists are trying to impose on the United States. Racial justice. Christian nationalists call for denying that American history has ever been racist. Project 2025 is trying to get DEI out of every place in which federal government has control, rolling back DEI programs in the federal government, using anti-discrimination laws even to go against people who seek to fight systemic racism and advance DEIA. And this really stems from very early or earlier in the Christian nationalist history, where this movement was using their religious beliefs to resist integration and to say that white people are superior based on their biblical views. So that's kind of the root of this movement that's now grown, and it is much more focused on attacking LGBTQ plus individuals, on reproductive rights, but the core is still there of rejecting the notion that America was racist, that there was any problem with segregation and all of that history. Immigrants' rights. In Project 2025, Christian nationalists are calling for incarcerating 100,000 immigrants every day. That's the capacity that they ask for. They want to make it harder for immigrants to work, and they want to abandon families fleeing persecution and restricting the immigration of people that it dislikes. And here we should remember that Muslim ban was Christian nationalism. At its core, it was entirely a xenophobic reaction to welcoming more Muslim refugees into our country as a result of the realities of the global refugee crisis, including the conflict in Syria, in Iraq, in Afghanistan. And Muslim ban came about as a result of those who wanted to keep our country white and Christian. So why is church-state separation more critical than ever? I hope it's evident from the amount of threat that we're facing through Project 2025, but also there's already a lot happening that we are fighting against. Okay, let me go back. We talked about the Root and Rams, the couple that was discriminated against in their attempt to foster and adopt a child. But there's a lot more that we're also hearing about all the time. So some of the legislation that we've been seeing in just this past year, school chaplains. So, oh, I'm sorry, can you see my screen? I realize that maybe you cannot. Okay.
No.
Do that again. Okay. There we go. Okay, so school chaplains, we've been seeing bills in states around the country that would allow schools to bring in chaplains to schools to act as counselors. And often these bills do not have any qualifications for counselors. They don't require, they don't require chaplains to have any qualifications for mental health support training. They don't really have any guidelines. And a couple of states have already adopted these. So Florida is a place that adopted a school chaplain law, and we at Americans United are very closely following what's happening, and whether any school districts will move to adopt that. But you can imagine how harmful that can be for students from religious minority backgrounds, as well as for LGBTQ plus students who are seeking guidance and counseling, and what they the counseling that they can access is school chaplains who are not trained to properly support those students. So that is now in place, not only in Florida, but also in Texas and Louisiana. We've also seen an increase in talk about changing school curriculum to emphasize Bible study and the role of Bibles in Western civilization. And while schools are permitted to teach about the Bible as a matter of a part of Western civilization, they're not allowed to proselytize. And the discussions around the Bible study are clear that it's going to be veering into that direction. So, for example, if you want to teach the class about the Last Supper, it would be fine to say, okay, this is the Last Supper, the painting. It would be fine to say this is a painting that's inspired by this story in the Bible. But then for some of the discussions around that kind of teaching has gone into, okay, now ask the students, okay, what happened at the
Mari, I think your sound is getting garbled. No, it's still garbled.
Is this any better?
Oh, it's a lot better.
Oh, okay. I just got these new headphones because I was having problems, but apparently I still have not solved the problem. Apologies for that. I was just talking about the new law in a new law in Louisiana that requires every public school classroom to post the 10 Commandments, a certain version of the 10 Commandments in every classroom. Americans United with our partners have gone in to challenge that law. And we're working with parents and families, both religious and non-religious, who are standing up against this law because it violates their religious freedom. It violates the parents' right to raise children in the religion that they want their child to be raised in. And even when we have plaintiffs who are Christian, who in their tradition use a different version of the 10 Commandments. So we have a whole coalition of people who are trying to tell the story about why these kinds of laws are harmful to the community and to American society. That case is in the district court now. We actually have a hearing coming up at the end of this month to try to get that law enjoined so that
public school students in Louisiana can go to their schools without having to see the 10 Commandments in their classrooms every day. And then in terms of what we're seeing already, abortion bans that have been in place across the country as a result of Dobbs. A lot of those bans, in discussing those bans, the legislators were very explicit that this was about imposing narrow religious views about life on personal medical decisions. So one of the issues that we've been working on at Americans United is the abortion ban in Missouri. And there, the legislators talked a lot about how this is about imposing their view of Christianity on all of the pregnant people in Missouri. So we see all of the reproductive rights movement and the fight is very closely connected to the fight for the separation of church and state. What we see is that the Christian nationalist agenda takes away our freedom and equality on so many fronts, from reproductive rights, LGBTQ+ rights, democracy also is a fundamental principle, and that church-state separation is what can and will stop the Christian nationalists. So that is our fight for Americans United in a nutshell. We hope that you join us. I've put up some of where you can find us. You can find us on social. We also have a page specifically on Project 2025. So you can go to our website and find those materials. We have some talking points that you can use to talk to your friends to share the threat that it poses. And we also have a link to that video that I shared with you at the beginning of this talk. So thank you. That's it for what I have prepared, and I'm happy to open it up for questions.
Well, Mari, we'll start with some questions that we've gotten ahead of time. And the first question would be, the Heritage Foundation has been developing the mandate for leadership, the policy portion of Project 2025, since the early 1980s. And how do these earlier versions compare to Project 2025? And given the attention based on Project 2025, how much more problematic is this version than prior versions, if that's true?
I haven't looked really so much to make that comparison, but I do think that what's in here is unprecedented in terms of the threat that it poses to the United States, because it's really talking about imposing a theocracy. If Christian nationalists win, we have a country that is founded on and where our policies are based on a very narrow version, extremist version of Christianity. And you can't really have a democracy in that kind of a system. So this is not anything like what's been proposed or what's happened before. And I would say that the threat is dire in that way.
Okay. You had mentioned another question that came up. You had mentioned the funding that was behind some of the organizations. Can you at least speak to some of the major funding that's coming in for Project 2025? Who are the major contributors as far as dollars?
Sure. So one of the major contributors is Leo, Leonard Leo, the co-chairman and former executive vice president of the Federalist Society. And then also the Koch Foundation. or the Koch brothers, and their money. So together, those, I think I have the amount, it's over $55 million in funding that has flowed from those networks to Project 2025's architect. So not just putting together this proposal, but the architecture of the whole policy proposal.
Including all the 4 pillars, the policy, as well as the database, as well as the training.
Yes, and to advancing these proposals, you know, to the work that's already going on to advance these proposals.
Other than, I realize that AU is a nonprofit and non-partisan, but other than defeating Project 2025 and Trump at the ballot box this November, what can be done long-term to maintain and expand the separation of church and state in this country?
Well, I think it's continuing to pay attention to these issues beyond 2025. Like I've been saying, this is going to be an ongoing threat. And it's going to be a threat that takes place not just at the federal level, but maybe even more at the state and local levels. And so just being engaged in your local elections as well, school board issues, really studying those issues and understanding what's being proposed, and doing what you can at those levels to defeat Christian nationalism. It's also really important to just spread the word about Christian nationalism and about Project 2025. There's still a lot of people who don't know about these threats. A few months ago, most people, over 75% of the people, knew little or nothing about Project 2025. And yet studies showed that the more people learn about it, the more they oppose it, which, you know, is why it's widely known now, I think, as being something that people want to distance themselves from. But successfully warning even 1 or 2 people about the threat can really make a difference.
We do have one question on the chat, and if I can see it here, can you expand on the point about incarcerating 100,000 immigrants every day, and what does that mean? How would it be implemented, and does Project 2025 prescribe the specific number, and if so, why?
That number 100,000 is the number that Project 2025 uses for the capacity, the detention capacity that it seeks to build up. And then it's accompanied by a number of policy proposals that would increase the number of immigrants who are being detained, both people who are coming into the country and those who are here already. Yes, sorry, I'm seeing this comment on the side now. Is it okay to share screenshots on social media from your presentation? Yes, you are welcome to share. Actually, the originals are on our website, though, Americans United, au.org/Project 2025. So you can find some of our graphics there to share.
Are there any other questions from our audience for Mari?
I just dropped the link to our website. You'll see also our toolkit there, as well as link to the video that I shared and some more information about Project 2025.
The couple that you portrayed in Tennessee, could you give us just a little bit more of a background on that? Because they were trying to adopt a child through a tax-funded adoption agency. How did that, and they were denied being able to do that because they were Jewish? How did that come about?
I mean, it's egregious, and this is the future that could become the norm. So, in order to adopt, they had to work with an agency to make sure that they are qualified to welcome the child, and in their area, the organization that served that community was this taxpayer-funded Christian agency. And they refused to work with them because they're Jewish. And we've seen similar types of discrimination from adoption and foster care agencies where we've been involved before, involving people who are of different faith. It's obviously an issue that could affect LGBTQ plus couples. This is an area that Christian nationalists have been very focused on. And they were explicit in mentioning cases like ours in Project 2025 and saying that our litigation trying to rectify the discrimination that the couple faced is a problem. Project 2025 considers our litigation to be a problem.
There is a question. Is if that agency was if the agency was tax funded, is it not allowed to discriminate?
Yes, absolutely, and that's our point. That is, it's a taxpayer funded organization. They cannot discriminate. They have to comply with the civil rights laws. And so we are not wading into any religious beliefs. What we're saying is if you do receive taxpayer dollars, you have to provide the services that those taxpayer dollars were meant for.
Another question that we had ahead of time was that about the Department of Education, and you had addressed that as to the importance of having the Department of Education to stand up for, equal rights and non-discrimination. But if the Department of Education was abolished, what impact would that really have on minorities and people of color?
It would just make it much more difficult to ensure that public schools remain a safe and welcoming environment for everybody, for students who are LGBTQ+, Black and Brown, or have disabilities. Because one of the purposes of having a federal Department of Education is to provide federal oversight that ensures that kind of equality of access as well as quality education. So that's exactly what Project 2025 is going after.
Are there any other questions for Mari before we allow her to get back to her 3-year-old? I don't see anything. Thank you so much, Mari. I really appreciate the time and the information. And, we're behind you. We will support you.
Thank you so much. I'm also, happy if you have any other questions afterwards, I'm happy to have you reach out. So thank you so much. And thanks for having me and listening to my presentation.
Well, thank you. Well, our next, what a great talk and what great information on Project 2025 and the motivations behind it. As Kyoko mentioned in her email, our next speaker really needs no introduction, but since that is my job today, it is my honor to introduce our next distinguished speaker on Project 2025, Leah Greenberg. Leah is a co-founder of the Indivisible movement and co-executive director of Indivisible National, of which Livermore Indivisible is a local chapter. Along with her co-founder and spouse, Ezra Levin, Leah has been featured as one of Time 100 Most Influential People of 2019. She's been included on GQ's 50 Most Powerful People in Trump's Washington and ranked number 2 on the Politico 50 list of top thinkers, doers, and visionaries transforming American politics. She is the co-author of We Are Indivisible, a blueprint for democracy after Trump, which was published in 2019. Please give a warm welcome to Leah Greenberg.
Hi, everybody. I forgot to lock my door, and so I am joined at this moment by my Lila, our younger child. Give me 1 second. I'm just gonna hand her off, and I'll be right with you.
No problem. We're dealing with a 3-year-old with Mari and a little girl with Leah too. So she will be back.
So sorry about that. We are going through the very intense stranger danger phase. So she's pretty tightly stuck to me under normal circumstances. Hi everybody. It is great to be here with you today. And thank you. First off, before I get started, thank you. It is always a pleasure to speak to any Indivisible group, but I know you all are really putting in the work, and that is what we were talking about here today. So it's great to be here with you. And I figured I would well, Danessa asked if I would speak to how to message and how to talk about Project 2025 in conversations with voters. So I pulled a couple of different things from the different places where we get our own data, messaging, research, etc., to talk about and to frame it up with you. But I also just want to note up front that, you know, speaking as somebody who came out of the policy world myself, right? I was a policy person before coming to Indivisible. I was, you know, in the political world and doing a lot of stuff as a congressional staffer before that. One of the things that often made me nervous about talking to voters early on, when I was still getting my cutting my teeth there, is I would feel like I had to be an expert. I feel like I needed to know all of the policy and know, you know, be prepared in case somebody stumped me with a tough question. And that if I didn't know that, then maybe I wasn't prepared enough to go out and talk as a canvasser or as a phone banker. And I think it's incredibly important that even as we dive into this, and even as we talk about a far-reaching and enormously complex plan that the other side has for how they're going to transform America, we remember that at the end of the day, the power that we have as people who are going out, who are talking to voters, who are having these conversations, is not that we have mastered every single page of Project 2025 and we're here to share it all with you or with somebody. It is that we are people who are directly impacted, right? Our freedoms are up for, what is what on the line in this election. Our social safety net is what is on the line in this election. Our vision of government and the role it is supposed to play in supporting and helping us thrive, as opposed to repressing us and forcing us into conditions and roles that we do not want to be in. That is what is on the line. And so we don't have to have every single, we need to know how we are impacted, and we need to have the authority of somebody who cares about the issues you care about, but we do not need to know literally everything about Project 2025. So I just want to name that before I jump in. Now, I will tell you quickly before I actually talk a little bit about that, or the framing as well. Project 2025 is breaking through to voters. Very recent data and polling in battlegrounds shows that it really has cut through the noise, and it is overwhelmingly unpopular, not just with Democrats, but with independents, and that it is often clearly and closely affiliated with some of the least popular things that the Trump agenda covers. So the thing to know before I jump in is that this is working, right? it's always a little bit of a question of like, if what we're talking about is actually making it through to your average disaffected voter. A lot of times the kind of people that we're trying to reach, the swing voters, are not necessarily consuming the same sources of media that we are consuming. They are not necessarily people who like politics that much, right? Project 2025 is breaking through, and it is helping to persuade people about what is on the line in 2024. And so that is why this is powerful. That is why what we are doing is powerful. And that's why there's a lot of potential here. Now, in terms of how we talk about Project 2025, I would refer back to something that we have been kind of grounding our strategy in for the last year before the candidate switch, but I think that also remains important after the candidate switch, which is talking about this election in terms not only of the two candidates, but of the two potential futures that we have that we could have here, right? There is a future where we are celebrating a historic candidacy or presidency, but also making progress, guaranteeing national reproductive freedom, guaranteeing the right to vote, and ensuring that voters choose their politicians and politicians do not choose their voters. Amending and helping the social safety net with improvements on prescription drugs and healthcare, and a care economy where childcare and elder care and paid leave are guaranteed for everyone. That is the future that we are offering. Their future is the future of Project 2025. And so really thinking about how do we ground, the conversation with voters who might not be all the way with us or might not be convinced of the need to vote, in that basic idea of trying to convince them that they are going to have to choose one of these two futures. And Project 2025 is the validating mechanism for how you can tell that the other side is not messing around. The future that they are going to push on us is far-reaching, it is comprehensive, it is well planned out, and it is very, very real. Now, when we actually talk about Project 2025, there's a few places where we want to think about how we apply a narrative frame. First, we want to think about it in terms of freedom. A lot of what we can do with Project 2025 messaging is activate loss aversion, right? Voters hate losing things. They do not like it when, voters like the promise of nice things. Okay, sometimes a lot of the people that we're talking to may not really be convinced that electing the right people is going to lead to like the changes that they want to see. But they also really hate losing stuff they already have. And a lot of what Project 2025 does is take away things that you take for granted, right? Taking away your freedoms, taking away your ability to control your own body, taking away access to abortion medication, to birth control, potentially, freedoms associated with that, taking away money from the Department of Education, or collapsing the Department of Education entirely, and thus messing with your child's public school. These are the kinds of things that can activate that loss aversion. One factoid, and I haven't tested this, but I have found it personally effective, is talking about how it is so extreme and so far reaching. It's not just like the agencies and the things that you already know are the government, it's stuff you might not even know is the government at all. So if you've got a phone that has a weather app on it, all the data in that weather app comes from NOAA, the National Weather Service. They are going to get rid of NOAA. So you are not even going to have the ability to tell if there is a storm heading in your direction if Project 2025 comes to pass. Is that the biggest problem? No, but it is evidence of how extraordinarily far-reaching and how extreme this is, and how it will alter your life in ways that you might not even be able to predict right now. Now, the other piece that we try to ground this in is family, right? The ways this affects our families. It's going to have, that helps to create some emotional intensity. It helps to bridge to people's lived experience. You can take this in whatever direction is the most appropriate for you, and talking about how it will impact your family. Personally, as a mom of young kids, I talk a lot about education and schools and how it will impact the ability for my kids to have good public schools where they can thrive. That might be a different, you might talk about your family's ability to, all live in the same area based on the housing issues that it creates. You might talk about any number of ways in which it could affect your personal family or your kids. The other way, and then the other piece that we take this back to is future. So again, there are two futures, right? There is their future, or our future of progress, and their future of Project 2025. We want to make sure that we are continually honing in on the idea that this is what is their ultimate endpoint. This is what is on the horizon. It's not an abstract idea. It is literally where they are trying to take us. The other two pieces that we have gotten a lot of advice around kind of using and weaving into your messaging on this is corporate greed and collective power. I'm going to talk about each of those in succession. Corporate greed. sometimes people get a little bit overwhelmed by the laundry list, and you got to kind of weave this back into a story. Why are they doing all of these terrible things, right? Why are they trying to, get rid of the EPA and the Department of Education? Why are they, gutting all of Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security? They're doing all that so that they can give the money back to corporations and to billionaires. And so really kind of pulling that circle back around, they have a plan. The plan is to reward the people who put them back in office by taking things away from you. That is a really important core story. And then collective power. This can get overwhelming for people, right? Like this is a lot. It is, and we're trying to make it a lot. And we also want to make sure that when we do that, we give people a path back to a sense of power. So it's really about saying like, and if we all band together, we can stop this. And this is how we're going to do it. And obviously that segues into the conversation that we have about when and how somebody is going to vote. So those are my key kind of like touch points and key kind of framing advice that I would add. Freedom, family, future, corporate greed, collective power. A lot of this stuff is coming from Framing the Left, which is a great collaborative that does a ton of research around what works and what resonates with voters. The other piece that I would just add is that the polling so far on what is breaking through around Project 2025 shows that in particular, the two things that voters most associate with it and are most negative about is the threat to reproductive freedom, and particularly the idea that the government might control your pregnancy, monitor miscarriages and periods, become invasive in attempting to stop abortions. And then the idea that Department of Justice will be handing Donald Trump unprecedented powers. Those are the two things that voters are particularly ranking as the things they know about Project 2025 and the things that they are upset about Project 2025. So making sure that you're kind of repeatedly, whichever version of this that you tell, it's about the things that affect you, you're also weaving those 2 points in because we want to make sure that we hit those as well. I'm going to pause there and say, I just threw a lot at you in like a pretty short order. And once again, the most important thing that we do as people who are talking to voters is we break through, kind of the miasma of political ads, confusion, distaste, disengagement as a real human who's talking to a real human and showing that like, you think this is important enough that you are giving up your time to be out there on the phones, on the doors, doing the work to engage them. And so this is all best practices, but do not let the sense that you have to be perfect stop you from getting out there. The most important thing that we can do is have all of those conversations. They don't have to be perfect. They don't have to land perfectly for you to be a real and genuine and authentic messenger who's capable of breaking through. So thank you for your interest. And however, we're going to talk to voters. We got 50 something days to go.
Well, I do have a few questions for you about follow-on questions and about messaging. How do we tie this? How do we convince people? People aren't really supportive of Project 2025, but how do we actually tie it to? A lot of people don't think that Project 2020 that Trump will actually execute on Project 2025. How do we actually convince people that he will follow through?
Yeah, I think one thing that's really important there is you bridge that gap, the believability gap of like, oh yeah, politicians say a lot of things, but are they going to do it? By talking about the stuff in Project 2025 that's already being enacted in states, right? The idea that like women might have the state tracking their pregnancy and pursuing them if they try to flee the state to get an abortion, that is real life that is happening right now, right? And so the ideas that are already happening on the state level that are kind of like making Project 2025 come alive in Republican states, one, that links it to the broader Republican Party and the MAGA movement across the Republican Party, and two, it helps to bridge that believability gap. I think abortion is often one of the most central parts of this story, not because everyone is an abortion voter. The data we have suggests that not everyone is an abortion voter. Lots of people are, not concerned about that immediate right for themselves or their family. But abortion is a really important validator that when we say they're going to take away all these other freedoms, we are not, Chicken Little running around claiming that the sky is falling. We are talking about a plan that they have already set in motion, and we are pointing to the places where when they've achieved power, they have done the thing they said they were going to do.
Okay, now kind of going with family issues from financially, how will Project 2025 affect our middle class, perhaps even our wealthy families' taxes? Who wins and who loses financially in a Project 2025 world?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, Project 2025 is careful to that, there are places where you have to read between the lines a little bit in Project 2025, right? They're talking about massively gutting the federal budget to a degree that simply is not achievable without cutting into Social Security, into Medicare, into Medicaid. I believe they only talk explicitly about how they're going to gut Medicaid in the document. But if you read between the lines and you think about exactly what the scale of the cuts that they are calling for is within the federal budget, you cannot get there without getting into the mandatory programs like Social Security, like Medicare. And so it is entirely fair to say that they are talking about a major transfer of resources from working class and middle class families to the top 1% and to corporations.
Okay, and then what I've been intrigued by the Federal Reserve, the mandate, or at least I don't know, bringing the taking away the independence of the Federal Reserve. And how do you think how do we relate that to everyday working people?
Yeah.
Because I think that's a big issue.
So I think I would gently suggest that you probably want to think about which audience you're talking to. If you've got econ nerds in your life who are really into the Federal Reserve, that may be a place where you want to lean in. If that is not the case and you are talking to somebody who it's a college student who is getting their news from TikTok and thinks that both parties kind of suck, you really want to try and avoid overwhelming them with like a very intensive explanation of how a bunch of different things work within Project 2025 and why it's so destabilizing. I would put an example of this that I'm personally passionate about is kind of the gutting and attacks on the civil service. I think that's very bad. It's not the primary thing that I'm going to lead with when I'm talking to voters on the doors, unless they are in fact civil servants themselves, in which case I'm definitely going to talk about that. So I would say, I think part of the challenge with Project 2025 is we want to avoid overwhelming people with laundry lists of like all of the terrible things. And so you want to hone in on a couple of really resonant themes that are going to impact you and them directly, and or places where you know that they are personally activated. So it's not a great answer for how to talk about the Federal Reserve, but I think my follow-up would be like, unless you have reason to believe the Federal Reserve is what's going to activate people, I think you're probably going to have to explain too much how that ultimately ties back to harming them directly for it to work. So I would think about what is the harm that they will experience as a result of that, rather than like what is the mechanics that will be enacted by Trump.
Well, you mentioned about the firing of federal employees. And you said that you wouldn't really talk about that very much, but to me, I find that's very troublesome.
Yes.
Scary. What do you view the impact would be in firing all the federal employees and putting in loyalists instead? I can imagine.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. This is a manifesto for a government that is wholly politicized in order to do the bidding of Donald Trump without checks or balances, and done across a whole host of fronts in which they are weaponizing the federal agencies that they want to weaponize, and they are destroying the ones whose missions they do not care about or are hostile to. It's a far-reaching and horrifying situation on all fronts, right? And so that can both be true, and also there's a real difference between kind of like if I were making my analysis of this just as a policy paper versus if I were trying to boil down, when I'm talking to somebody who by definition is not sufficiently activated around politics as to spend their Sunday afternoon learning about Project 2025, right? Like I might have 30 seconds or 1 minute or 5 minutes maximum to get them and get their attention and really convince them that this is going to impact them personally. You want to be sure you're leading with something that feels extremely resonant to them personally, and activating that loss aversion, that sense of this thing that I have now is actually really on the chopping block.
What about the changes that are mentioned in Project 2025 for the Department of Justice? How do we bring that home? Because much more broadly, and how that would impact people everyday lives.
100%. I would say, I think you should not overestimate the extent to which people understand the relationship between the Department of Justice and other parts of law enforcement within the federal government, et cetera. I would focus on the ultimate impact, which is they're going to remove a lot of the traditional checks and balances that protect, the rest of us from a president gone amok. And they're going to concentrate all of that power in the White House in the hands of MAGA hacks who will do Donald Trump's bidding. And so they can then weaponize the Department of Justice and other agencies to go after his political enemies and to ensure that he never faces any accountability for his own corruption and crimes. So it's something like that, where you're not really trying to explain like every mechanical way in which he's going to, you know, politicize the Department of Justice, but you are trying to get to the ultimate impact, which is that he is going to have impunity and he's going to go after enemies and he is going to act like a dictator going forward.
Let's see, we have a question that says, how about the ties to the local races? For example, MAGA people running for school board who are finding their MAGA beliefs or talking about their MAGA beliefs. How do you suggest kind of at least talking about that?
Yeah,
because we do have some of that happening here locally.
Well, I would turn that question around and ask a little bit like, how are you messaging around those people right now, right? Like, what's the frame that you are finding that's most persuasive for convincing voters that these people have like an agenda?
This was a question that was Patricia. Do you have you want to talk about that?
You want me to come in? So it's Trish,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
Shows up as Patricia. We are not, I'm not sure we are at the moment. I mean, we're still a little bit of early days. This is in particular, there's one who ran before who actually should be fairly easy, you know, just sort of refer back to. For example, she does not have school kids in the schools. Her kids go to a Christian school. That's been made public so far. Another one is actually fairly quiet about it. You have to push pretty hard. I'm on the Alameda County Democratic Central Committee, and there's sort of a list of a litmus test set of questions. You know, what do you think about LGBTQ people? How about charter schools? What about banning books? You know, those kinds of things. And when there's a forum, I'm fairly sure those questions will be asked, but I'm not entirely sure what do you do if you're going door to door.
Yeah.
So
I mean, what I would say in general, like kind of taking my Project 2025 hat off and putting my like, you know, education wars of the last 4 years hat on is, I think the thing that people have found most consistent is to try to cut through, you know, the arguments that they want to have and frame it in terms of the arguments that you want to have, right? So these people, you know, there's a set of people who are running for school board not to make our schools better, but to destroy them. They are not invested in the public education system. They are, in fact, as you mentioned, like they may not even have their kids in the public education system. They're benefiting by the things that they do to make it worse. So I would say, you know, and like depending on some of the topics that are coming up, like, you know, I know many people have had the ability to turn kind of book banning and attacks on books and freedom of learning within the schools into a kind of reverse judo issue. That may or may not be the case for you, but, you know, but fundamentally, I think the basic messaging advice of like always try to figure out how it's going to impact the median voter's life directly, and then figure out and just like get their attention with it as quickly as possible, with in particular a focus on loss aversion, because again, voters may or may not believe that you're going to do something good in the future, but they definitely do not like it when you threaten to take something away from them.
So the other piece of this was the tie to Project 2025. This sounds like, you know, just based on where you took your questions, it sounds like it's maybe not worth doing that. You just take it from where it is.
I think that's the case unless you have a reason to. I guess what I would say is, I think if you have somebody who already understands what Project 2025 is and why it's a danger to the point where tying something else to Project 2025 can work, then maybe that's a way in. But you don't want to be in a situation where you're explaining what Project 2025 is and then trying to make a kind of ideological, but not like, you know, very tight link to people who are running locally, when you actually have a simpler line, which is like, look, she's out to destroy the public schools. Like, you know, that's ultimately what Project 2025 is. And it's ultimately what this candidate is going to do, but it's easier to just kind of connect it directly to the candidate unless there's some, you know, countervailing factor here.
Thanks. That's really, really helpful.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Trish. We have another question about what would life be like under Project 2025 if you're a senior citizen? So how would you message to senior citizens, like perhaps myself,
Yeah.
on Project 2025.
Yeah, I think I think we can get a little too fancy sometimes about this stuff. I think the very simplest and clearest answer is it's going to cut Social Security and Medicare. It is like, there is literally no way that they can pay for the tax cuts that they want to give to rich people without cutting Social Security and Medicare. And so this is very simply like a direct attack on this economic supports that allow you to live a dignified life in retirement.
Okay. I've been trying to scan some of the, there's also a question that, is there a progressive liberal organization that is comparative to the Heritage Foundation at this point?
Mm-hmm. You know, I would say there are a number of well, okay. I'm trying to think about how different to answer it without like just going into my thoughts on the Heritage Foundation.
Well, you can go into the thoughts on the Heritage Foundation.
I think there are a number of institutions that play some part of a comparable role, right? So Center for American Progress, obviously ideologically, sometimes more kind of like left center and sometimes more progressive, depending on like the individual fellow and the program and, you know, where it maps to. But we found them to be like a great partner on a whole host of things in terms of both kind of like messaging and framing around some of these political issues, including some great Project 2025 work. And then on some of the issues where we worked with them legislatively. Roosevelt Institute is really advanced in terms of the economic side of thing. They have been a real leader in kind of influencing the economic policy of the Biden administration, and particularly the personnel of policy within the Biden administration. So to the extent that kind of what Heritage did with Project 2025 was try to pull together like the entire blueprint. I think Roosevelt often is kind of like proactively thinking over the horizon about what would a future Democratic administration look like. I don't think there is a comparable kind of like all-in-one shop to the Heritage Foundation within the progressive side. I'm not sure that's necessarily a bad thing. Like it's not at all clear, you know, just to be honest, like lots of people develop transition memos between administrations, lots of issues do. Like it's a very normal thing, no matter what issue you are working on in Washington, that you have developed a transition memo for the next administration. I have written several of them when I was in the human trafficking world, and it would be like, here's the 50 pages of what you need to do when you're coming in on human trafficking. So it's very normal that lots of people develop some version of this. What was unique about Project 2025 was kind of like the complexity, the comprehensiveness, the way it pulled in an enormous number of people from across the ecosystem, you know, across the Trump world mega ecosystem, right? It was like 100 something. I can't even remember how many organizations, like a who's who of Trumpists, basically. And then also just that they put it on the internet and like made a cute splash page for it and acted like this would not be explosive content, right? Like in general, we don't try to lead with the things that are going to make people the most mad about our next administration. Like we don't, that's not like recognized or advisable messaging. So it's not clear that right now, I wouldn't advise replicating that for our side, not because I don't believe in all of our ideas, but because I think that, you know, during an election season, you want to talk about the things that are going to get people to come vote for you. You don't want to talk about literally everything you're going to do.
One, I had asked a question of our previous speaker that I think you kind of answered in the last question, but just in case, the Heritage Foundation has been coming up with a mandate for leadership since the early 1980s.
Yeah.
But I personally, you know, it's kind of, I haven't been aware of it until this year. What is different between what they've done in the past and Project 2025?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say a couple takes from my side, and I'm like very open to this being like a debated conversation, because like I don't claim to have the inside scoop on like conservative think tank people personally, but I do think one is kind of like the comprehensiveness of it is unique. The other is just that the Heritage Foundation's position has shifted. The Heritage Foundation was not necessary, you know, there were at one point there were like multiple kind of like competing centers of right-wing foreign policy or policy power. Cato Institute, which is libertarian, was at one point like much more closely linked with the Republican Party. When I was coming up in DC, like Cato and Heritage were both kind of like well regarded, right? They were institutes in good standing with the Republican Party. Cato has fallen by the wayside because they have not embraced Trumpism, whereas Heritage kind of like after a series of power struggles went full Trumpy. So I think like part of what has changed is that Heritage has become the Trump think tank in a way that it wasn't even in 2017 fully. And that is different. And then part of what has changed is kind of like the competitors are no longer in the same place.
Okay, let's see. What do you say to people who believe Trump and MAGA will reduce taxes and improve the economy? And
Yeah.
I personally was out canvassing, and I ended up talking to a Republican who said, I don't like the way he talks, but oh, he does a great job on the economy. And so how do you talk to someone like that?
Yeah.
And bring in Project 2025, perhaps?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, maybe. I think in general, you kind of like, you start by trying to figure out what's gonna cause someone to like, or like what things are most important to someone. So if all you have is this information that they vaguely think Trump is good for the economy, like I would maybe try to ask a couple follow-up questions about like what in their life is stressful to them, and or like how they view the world, right? So you know, like, oh, or like for example, a common thing with inflation, right, is like, you know, you say, oh, costs are tight right now. And, you know, like costs keep rising. You say, oh, is there, you know, are there like particular things in your life that are really, really stressing you out? And, you know, somebody says like, yeah, childcare really is, the cost of childcare is increasing a lot, right? Or something like that, where you actually have an in to talk about an economic issue where we have an advantage. If you're talking to, you know, just candidly, if you're talking to like a quite wealthy person who is saying, look, well, Trump will cut my taxes, they're not wrong. Trump will cut their taxes. So I do think at that point, you're not trying to like disabuse them on economic grounds. You are trying to figure out if there's any kind of other issue or values-based issue that you can hook onto that might counter, you know, that might overcome that kind of economic orientation. I think there's like a side conversation that's like, it's incredibly frustrating that given how much better Democrats have consistently been at managing the economy, there is this like ongoing narrative about Republicans and Trump being better. That is true. There are many people who have been working on that for a long time. For the purposes of a conversation with voters, it's like extremely hard to dislodge a baseline idea like that in that single conversation. You're just not going to be able to like pull out your chart and say, here's how the economy goes under Democrats and here's how it goes under Republicans. You kind of got to try and poke around and figure out if there's another value that you can grab onto and like start to talk to them about in terms that might override their initial instinct. That's my advice. Like, you know, in general, I think my answer is usually spend enough time talking to the person to figure out if you can get a different in if you're hitting a wall on one place, because it's unlikely you're going to completely overturn their ideas on that front in one conversation, but you might find something else they care about too.
Helen, I'm going to be asking you, did you see any additional questions on the chat that we could ask Leah?
I haven't really seen any on the chat, but I think maybe if you could expand about the education problem, if the Department of Education was disbanded,
yeah,
what
does that mean?
Yeah, what would that mean? And would it also spill over to, say, California?
Yeah.
Is there anything a state could do to protect against it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I guess I would say first, a bunch of money ostensibly would be taken back, right? So a bunch of funding that goes normally to support lower income schools would simply not go out to begin with, according to the plans that they have. The other piece of this that I think is like, again, this gets to like how much conversation do you want to have with that voter, but the like funding that currently comes with oversight would go to states most likely as like block grants with no strings attached. The problem with that is that red states will usually use that money however the heck they want to with no accountability. And so there's simply, you know, it is a net transfer to red state budgets to use for undoubtedly taxes. Ezra actually can tell you a very extended story about his fight to stop stimulus dollars in 2010 from going straight into Texas's rainy day fund, like multi-year lawsuits, lots of maneuvering, et cetera, et cetera. But the long and short of it was, after like an extended fight within Congress and the judiciary, Texas ultimately was able to like take all of the money that it got from stimulus for education and just plop it right into the rainy day fund and give everyone a tax cut. So that kind of thing would be a very plausible outcome. The ability to like enforce civil rights in schools would be significantly rolled back. So like, there's a bunch of stuff that the Department of Education does around kind of like oversight of, how public schools are performing and whether they are adhering to their requirements. And that would just simply cease to function. Some of the stuff, it's kind of like, what would happen? It's a little hard to say, because all of these systems were constructed based on the assumption that these people are here doing their job and these people are here doing that job. And so if you take out some of those people, like what happens next? A little bit, you can't predict it all with certainty, but what you can say is that people who care about our public schools and people who care about students in public schools do not just take a wrecking ball to the institutions that are designed to protect and support students.
How would you suggest that we talk to people about the environment? Because certainly Project 2025 is, drill, 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 yeah. So, and how can we make it more at least important to people as far as their safeguards?
Yeah. This is one where, unless you have an environmentalist, and probably if you have an environmentalist, it's unlikely they're on the fence, but maybe like I can imagine somebody, but I would keep it really simple. Like, there are agencies that protect our drinking water from pollution. There are agencies that protect our air from pollution, or there are regulations that protect our air from pollution. This is going to completely destroy the ability of the federal government to influence them. So you're just going to be at the mercy of local corporations and whether they want to dump something in your water.
Yeah. On another front, when I was canvassing, I think in 2022, because California has enshrined the right of having an abortion into the state constitution, a lot of people don't really believe that nationally, what happens nationally can really impact California as far as abortion rights. So how would you message that as well?
Yeah. I would say that what California's current, like, your experience of living in California is currently composed of a combination of like interlocking and interacting state and federal protections, right? And so there are ways in which the state can kind of like move to try to protect against certain things, but there are also just like a lot of things that are within the federal government's control that simply are not within the state's control. And so I do think that I would try and hone in on like what's going to be the most important to that person. There is simply like an enormous amount of resources and regulations and technical expertise when it comes to environmental work, when it comes to, forest protection, when it comes to like anything about water quality that is held at the federal level and that is not simply replicable by the states. And so I would just say, I think that I would be thoughtful about like what exactly they are worried about, because there are some places where it's literally stuff from the federal government that is helping them live a good life in California that's getting taken away. And there's also stuff where it is new ways that the federal government is going to be imposing its vision of who you should be and, like how society should work on them. But there's a bunch of, different ways that will manifest, right? Everything from the potential for a national medication abortion ban or a national abortion ban or a medicated abortion ban, because national abortion ban is not technically in Project 2025, but we don't need to split hairs there. To telling insurers that they don't have to cover prescription drug or birth control prescriptions and anymore, to the potential for travel registries for women who are traveling, right? So I would try to cut through the idea that it is, well, let's see how to say this. It is totally possible that you will not personally see the most dramatic impacts of Project 2025. It is true that some of those will be felt much more significantly in red states, and also there's simply no way that you have a federal government that is taken over by fascists who are then able to tap into the full power of the federal, the Department of Justice without having personal consequences come for you pretty fast.
Helen, I'll just go to you one more time until we thank Leah for her inspirational messaging. Helen, is there any one last question?
Okay, how about this? Money in politics. I think you've touched on this, but Citizens United, etc. How will Project 2025 exacerbate this situation? I'm sure it will.
Yeah.
And if so, how, and what impact would 2025 have on campaign finance for reform laws?
That's a great question, and I actually don't have a great answer for you. I think my immediate flip answer is giving, vastly more money to very rich people probably won't do anything good for our current campaign finance situation, but I don't know very much about the actual ways in which Project 2025 alters campaign finance. So I will follow up on that. And as I say that, I actually do want to flag for people, I'm sensing a lot of interest in kind of getting into more of the policy meat. The Center for American Progress has actually done a very good breakdown of a bunch of the different issue areas and how Project 2025 impacts various things that you will care about, and also what are the best set of kind of standalone arguments if you're not having a conversation but you're just trying to hit a couple of key lines, things that people are most upset about Project 2025. This is going to be a little bit in contrast with some of the guidance I gave around the battleground polling, but I think it's still pretty valuable. So I'm just going to pop that in the chat box as well, so you can kind of if you do want to go deeper on education, or you want to go deeper on, I think they actually have a, what is the impact on senior citizens, so they can give you a lot more detail than I have. You can definitely dive in there. It will have you covered. I do just want to again reiterate though that whenever we get a chance to talk to an undecided voter, the odds that they want to the full breakdown on policy are very slim compared to the odds that you can get them by talking about the really basic stuff that they have heard of and they care about, like clean water or Medicare.
Okay. Would you be willing to stay on the screen just for a little bit so that we can get a picture of everyone with you in it? So we're going to take you off the spotlight, hopefully me too, and then just get a picture with us all in with you. Thank you so much, Leah. We really appreciate you coming and talking to us and inspiring us to go out there, write postcards and canvas and talk to our friends and families about this upcoming election and how terrible Project 2025 will be for all of us.
Wonderful. And I just for your viz, I'm putting the CAP kind of table of contents for all the things they have and some of the polling I referenced in the chat box if you want to browse a little bit more on your own time.
So please come on to the video, everybody. Lots of people still on the black screen. Are we all ready? Okay, let's go. 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great night or evening.
Thank you, Leah.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I have a few announcements before we close up. First of all, we will be posting the recording of this meeting on Zoom or on our website. And with that, we will also have a link to additional resources. As you can tell, we're very into the weeds about Project 2025, and we've come up with an exhausting list of resources that you can actually get more information. There's videos. It's just amazing how much information there is out there and about Project 2025. So now that we know more about Project 2025 and we want Vice President Harris to be our next president, the next step is to take action. And to find out what you can do, please visit the Livermore Indivisible website. If you scroll down our homepage, you'll find a link on the many ways to take action. We are still writing the Go TV postcards. So let Helen know via email, and I think she will put her email in the chat if you're interested, or the Livermore Indivisible Facebook page. If you're interested in writing postcards, let her know, and let her know how many. And our next in-person meeting is October 6th, where we will be writing postcards. There's a theme here, postcards to postcards. On October 13th, tentatively, we will have a Zoom meeting about the California propositions and guidance and some information as to how one should think of the propositions and more information about them. For local events, on September 19th, Livermore Indivisible is co-hosting, along with the Livermore Vine, a Livermore School Board Candidate Forum from 6 to 8 p.m. You can view it via Zoom or in person at the district office. And you can find more information on our website about that forum. And last but not least, there will be a Livermore City Council Candidate Forum on September 30th from 4 to 7 p.m. at the Robert Livermore Community Center. I think that's all I have today. So thank you for joining us. Is there anything that I'm missing that anyone else would like to add? No, so going once, going twice. Thank you for attending and learning more about Project 2025.